What's up, guys? Hello, so Football Talk here. Once again, doing a full breakdown of the entire NFL slate. We're a dozen of weeks in, and the NFL is still a bit of an enigma. The Titans were the number one seed in the AFC just a minute ago, it feels like. Now they've lost Ed Houston by multiple possessions, and outside of a surprise end-off that ended in a long touchdown, they couldn't score another point over 3 quarters at New England. The Rams look like a juggernaut and brought in more star players like Odell Beckham Jr. and Von Miller, and now they've lost 3 straight since then. On the other hand, the once 1-7 Dolphins have now won 4 straight, and the 49ers, who looked dead in the water after losing to the Cardinals backups, have now won 3 straight by, funnily enough, 49 points. There's some comfort in seeing teams like the Ravens, Patriots, Chiefs, Packers and Bucs leading their divisions, but even they've been up and down to some degree, and at the bottom of the playoff seedings, it's an absolute shit show, to where you have 7 teams in each conference respectively, with either 5 or 6 wins on the year. So really there's only about 5 teams that I'd say are definitely out of the hunt at this point, and this is going to be a barn burner down the stretch. For now, we want to look at the matches of Week 13 and get into depth about the crucial ones that will likely affect playoff seedings. This is not the strongest slate of games we've seen overall by any means, but there's one game in every time slot that I can't wait to watch. So my plan is now to focus more time on those, and not as much on games that I think would categorize as mismatches or just not very good games overall. Once again, all the betting lines that I feature here are from my book at the point that I'm recording this, which is Wednesday noontime. So if there's any major news coming out or the market shifting, those things may not be taken into account yet. And timestamps for all the matchups are down below if you're interested in just a few of these. Otherwise, sit back, relax, and let's dive into these games together. First and foremost, we got 4 teams entering the bye week. The Packers, Panthers, Browns and Titans. Just a few words on them. For Green Bay, they're now sitting pretty at a 9-3 record, which is just half a game behind the Cardinals in terms of playoff seedings for all teams in the league, and they got the head-up tiebreaker against those guys. Now they got a week off to get Aaron Jones healthy, while 3 of the other top 5 players in David Bakhtiari, Za'Darius Smith and Gio Alexander have a chance to get back from IR. This might be the number 1 team in the league right now. For Carolina, much more of a letdown this past week when they got beat down at Miami. Cam Newton looked awful against the re-emerging Dolphins defense, which I actually did a breakdown on my social media channels if you want to check that out. Which was even worse because there was plenty of promise the week prior. They lost that game as well, and all of a sudden they're back to 2 games below 500 with a trip to Buffalo, and their 2 matchups against the Bucs still ahead of them. They better get Cam up to speed now. For Cleveland, very disappointing Sunday night game, I would say, considering they got 4 picks of Lamar Jackson and still lost by 6 at Baltimore. The run game has slowed down to some degree, and he really has had some issues this past Sunday. Baker has looked awful and really banged up, and as great as that defense has looked recently, we've seen them get diced up by some of the other premier quarterbacks, with 4 games of 33 plus points allowed already. Now they get a week off, only for those edge defenders to get frustrated about having to corral Lamar again right after that. And then finally Tennessee, I think the team that needed this break the most. Once again, the feeling about a team can completely flip from one week to the other. And when you lose to the Texans and then you get declassed 36-13 by the Patriots, people are going to jump off the bandwagon. The bad news, their offense lacks explosive ability and has not been able to run the ball effectively at all since Derrick Henry got hurt, other than a few big runs that they had this past Sunday, including that 68-yard surprise handoff that went for a touchdown before the half. The good news, they already won the season series against the Colts and just have to fend them off for the division, while potentially getting back to the trio of AJ Brown, Julio, and King Henry in January. But now let's actually dive into this Week 13 slate, starting off with Thursday Night Football, the 7-4 Dallas Cowboys at the 5-6 New Orleans Saints. Dallas favored by 4.5, over-under set at 47.5. The 2 disappointments from Thanksgiving, if you don't count that first game between the Bears and Lions altogether. All of a sudden the Cowboys have lost 3 of the last 4, and the Saints are riding a 4-game losing streak themselves, while getting worse by the week it feels like. With both having played exactly a week ago, there's no real advantage here in terms of time to rest, but Malone is playing host here, with Alvin Kamara potentially being back in the fold, does make an impact I would say. Dallas to me is the more confusing team here, since we saw the rest of the team step up big time against the Vikings without Dak a good month ago. Then they lay an egg at home against the Broncos, only to destroy the Falcons a week later. Then the offense doesn't show up at Kansas City, and then a bounce back spot in Thanksgiving, in the most watched regular season game of all time. The defense disappears all of a sudden, and they lose in overtime to the Raiders. The plan to rest Zeke is the right one, even though there have been some conflicting reports about that. Mostly because Tony Pollard has about 5 times as much juice right now, And I still think high of this offense because the receiving corps should be fully back. Dak looked much better against the Raiders. And Kellen Moore has only been outmatched once this year, it feels like, at Kansas City as a play caller, which is why they're tied for second with just under 30 points per game and tied for first with 6.2 yards per play. The defense was a disappointing unit all of a sudden on Turkey Day, but Anthony Brown extending drives 4 times with flags for pass interference, and a couple of other questionable calls, I would say, against them definitely made matters worse. They can take the ball away and right now are the number 2 third down defense in the league, but thanks to that sea of yellow last Thursday, they now lead the league with over 74 penalty yards per game, so they definitely have to clean that up. With New Orleans, I think the first couple of weeks with Trevor Siemian on the center were less indicative of where they actually are as a team, because it's all in the defense and run game, which now the backfield is really banged up offensively, and we saw Josh Allen and company carve up some of those man coverages with clever route spacing and just the dynamic ability in the receiving corps that New Orleans simply can't even sniff. And when you don't even quite average 4 yards per carry, and you're at the bottom of the list in explosive passes, you're going to struggle to consistently create scoring opportunities, even if they're number 2 in red zone touchdown percentage when they do get down there. Defensively, they stop the run better than any other team in the league, actually allowing half a yard less per carry than the next closest group, as well as leading the pack with 62 tackles for loss. They have bodies to send at the quarterback up front, and they can create some takeaways. They haven't looked the same on that side of the ball since the upset win over the Bucs, but I think with how much they've been on the field, that has definitely been a factor for them as well. When I'm putting these notes together, the one variable that I just have no idea about yet is how COVID can affect the road team here, because while the Cowboys will probably benefit from Mike McCarthy actually not being there on Thursday, we don't know which major players might also be affected here. However, unless it's Dak or the top 2 receivers again, to where the Saints defense can just lock in on stopping the run and trust the defensive backs to hold up in man coverage, I think they just present more issues for the opposition. Really the big area of concern for Dallas on Thanksgiving was Anthony Brown getting flagged and burnt down the field constantly, but other than Deontay Harris to some degree, and maybe some jump balls up to Marcus Callaway, I don't see what really scares you about the Saints offense, to where Dallas allowing the most yards after the catch won't hurt them as much, as great a play caller as Sean Payton may be. Kellen Moore can find some answers to New Orleans defense by watching last week's tape against the Bills, and the way that they space the field and works against leverage with certain route patterns, and Dallas' receiving corps is actually more talented. Trevor Siemian and the offense can chip away a little bit probably and move the ball. We'll have to see what kind of dynamic Taysom Hill can add to the mix if they actually give him more time or even may start him. No official word on that yet, just know he's taking more reps with the ones. But the Cowboys will make a play or two and get the ball back for the offense, and I just don't think the Saints have enough. So I gotta go with Dallas here, winning 27-18. With the way they've been up and down recently, I'm just not comfortable with actually betting them here, but I definitely think they're more than just 4.5 points better than their opposition. Which has us moving on to Sunday with the 1 p.m. slate, starting things off with the New York Giants at 4-7, going to Miami to take on the 5-7 Dolphins. Home team favored by 4.5, total set at 40.5, and this is actually one of those sneaky matchups that I have an eye on. I don't think either one of these teams is set up to be a major player down the stretch, but both still have a chance to sneak into the playoffs, thanks to the defense really stepping up recently. I'm looking forward to 2 former defensive minds out of New England, in Patrick Graham and Brian Flores, going up against each other. The Giants are a really weird team when you look at who they've beaten. The Saints when they were still good, a domination of the Panthers, they beat the Raiders by a touchdown, and now Philly, who were really hot coming into that one. The offense still has only scored over 20 points in 2 of the last 7 games, and Daniel Jones has improved, but he's still a turnover magnet, in a bad way that is, and they just can't get Saquon going. He, along with Chris Carson and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, have ruined my fantasy season. And Kadarius Toney was on my team for a couple of weeks as well, but the G-men clearly can't feature the weapons accordingly, and they're by far the worst red zone offense league-wide. The defense has been a bit up and down as well, because we just saw them hold the Eagles to 7 points and force 4 turnovers, and we've seen the pass rush improve, but I was so frustrated with the plan of attack the week prior, coming off the bye and letting Tom Brady pick them apart without even breaking a sweat really, because of how basic they were. I've just not seen what I was excited about when thinking about Patrick Graham and those guys coming into the season. For Miami on the other hand, can we acknowledge that Tua Tagovailoa is quietly having a pretty good season? I know it's a bunch of underneath quick game stuff, but he's completing over 70% of his passes and has the 3rd highest on-target percentage of his throws, with 10 touchdowns versus 6 picks. And if you take week 2 out of the equation, where he got hurt in like the 2nd drive of the day, he's gone 4-3 for them. He's gotten rid of the ball quicker than all but 2 quarterbacks, kept in check down Big Ben and Tom Brady, who's been in the league for like 100 years. Miami can run a lot of different personnel. Rookie Jalen Waddle is becoming a PPR machine, and they've been able to run the ball much more effectively, with some creativeness to how they dress things up, even if the offensive line is still a concern. The defense has been a big reason for the turnaround, however, as they've held their opponents to 11.5 points per game during the 4-game win streak. They're healthy in the secondary, and Flores trusts his guys to read and drive on routes, and quarterbacks can't really punish them for it. Unlike they did earlier in the year, which is why they're one completion of 20 plus yards away from leading the league in that category. More so, they can get home by sending one more than the offense can block before they bail out those looks and take away some easy completions late on in games, and now the heads of opponents are spinning. And by the way, edge rusher Jalen Phillips, he is starting to turn it on and really taking advantage of those one-on-ones he's given. Each team has a dynamic rookie receivers, Albie Gludon and Kadarius Toney and Jalen Waddle respectively. They both have the ability to make people miss in the phone booth and take the distance on any given snap, and I think how they both will be utilized will play a huge factor. Defensively, the approaches are a lot different in terms of more zone shells and the late games up front for the G-men, while the Dolphins are flat out in your face and bringing 7 and having the secondary jump everything. Daniel Jones is certainly more prone to turn the ball over than Tua, and this will be a game where the team that shows the more patience and doesn't make those big mistakes come out victorious, I would believe at least. So given Miami winning this one 23-19, not really anything that I want to put some money on here. Which brings us to an AFC South battle between the 6-6 Indianapolis Colts and the 2-9 Houston Texans. Indy favored by 9, over under set at 45.5. This is a divisional matchup between teams coming off season-best performances a couple of weeks ago, as Jonathan Taylor and the Colts had just run all over the Bills in a blowout victory, while the Texans pull off another stunning upset over the top team in the division, the Titans. They both had chances to follow up strong, but for Indy it looked like they were in control against the Bucs, before they finally became the ones on the wrong end of those turnover battles for the first time, and the Texans jumped into a double-digit lead against the Jets, but couldn't score another point over the final 40 minutes. With the Titans suffering yet another bad loss, the Colts had a huge chance to pull closer in the division race and secure themselves as playoff contenders in the AFC, while a boost from beating the reigning champs could have given them even more momentum. This is one of the more complete teams, with Jonathan Taylor being the premier big play machine from the running back spot. The offensive line has made major strides, to where they're now number 1 with 5.2 yards per rush, and Carson Wentz is quietly playing like a fringe top 10 quarterback, I would say. And only the Bucs, Bills and Cowboys have scored more points per game than them. The defense has had some issues on the perimeter, where Rock Ya-Sin was the victim of several ticky-tack pass interference calls, but they have great speed on the second level, the pass rush is starting to really come along, and they lead the league with 27 takeaways. Too many of those games have slipped away from them already this season, but if they make their way into the tournament, they're a really dangerous group and can probably beat anybody on a given day. All I have to say about the Texas offense here is that they couldn't score a single point in the second half against the freaking Jets, who were and still are in a league of their own in terms of how bad their defense has been statistically. And the 2 touchdowns that did have were set up by an interception from a defensive tackle and an incredible catch down the field by the only good player in Brandon Cooks. They've put up 9 points, 340 total yards, and 0.3 yards per play less than any other team in the league. Tyrod Taylor is one of the most overrated quarterbacks, especially by the betting market, and other than chucking up for Cooks, there's really nothing this offense can routinely rely upon. The defense has made some big plays, actually ranking 5th league-wide with 20 total takeaways, and they've actually not gotten killed for being put in bad situations by the counterparts, outside of the elite teams at least. But they've been getting more creative with finding ways to knock it off the field, I have to say. I think the last time these 2 teams met, back in mid-October, I was actually on Houston plus 10 or so, but they get crushed 31-3, and I get that they play host in this one, but I don't understand why they're all of a sudden just an 8.5 or 9-point underdog, depending on where you look, coming off a loss to the freaking Jets, when the Colts were this close to beating the Bucs. And I think this will be another beatdown, because Indy will be in the P's and Q's after letting that game slip away last week. They are a different animal in the trenches, the quarterback is playing at a much higher level, and they won't let a chance slip away to really step on the team that they dislike, while those guys are on the ground. And I'm curious, will we see another T.Y. Hilton banger? Because that guy has owned Houston for about a decade now, obviously. But I'm going to go with the Colts here, 34-14. I think as long as you get it under 10, this is a value to bet here, because the Colts should be favored by more than that. And with that, we'll move on to another divisional battle between the 5-6 Minnesota Vikings and the 0-10-1 Detroit Lions. We've had a lot of these NFC North matchups recently, I feel like, but the Vikings actually beat the Packers 2 weeks ago, and then we saw the disgrace of a game to kick off Thanksgiving between the Bears and the Lions. Now with Minnesota traveling to Detroit, coming off a loss in high-scoring favor of the 49ers, while the counterparts are still looking for the first victory under Dan Campbell. Those players are certainly hungry for a dub, but the Vikings are still in the hunt for the playoffs, now tied with Washington for the 7th seed, but having lost the tiebreak with San Francisco just ahead of that. Looking at Minnesota here first, despite turning the ball over twice against the Niners this past Sunday, the Seahawks are still the only team to have done so less than the Vikings 8 times this season, and those guys are one of the least effective units in the league. Minnesota is also tied for a league low 15 sacks surrendered, even though the pressure percentage doesn't quite match up and it's definitely higher, and they are a very balanced unit altogether, I would say. Suffering injuries to Dalvin Cook, who'll miss at least 2 weeks, and rookie left tackle Christian Darrisaw, who I haven't heard anything else about, will definitely be factors going forward, however. The defense, on the other hand, leads the league with 33 sacks in the season, and features some big-time veteran names, but they're now 24th in points and 30th in yards allowed, while surrendering a league-high 4.8 yards per rush. At this point, most of those guys on there are pretty much overrated, and they lost their best player, Daniil Hunt, for the season about a month ago. What is impressive, we've seen 4 kick return touchdowns this season, and the Vikings rookie Kenan Nwango has been responsible for 2 of them. The Detroit offense has been rough to watch, especially considering the Bears came in as maybe the most style offense with Andy Dalton in the center, but Detroit was even worse. Jared Goff may not kill his team with turnovers on a weekly basis, but he doesn't deliver anything that isn't served up to him on a silver platter. He averages a 40 air yard less per completion than the next closest quarterback in the league, and he throws it about 3 yards short of the 6 on average. They're tied for 15 yards per rush, with the offensive line being a real bright spot, but now DeAndre Swift is banged up, and the lack of receiving talent is apparent. Counter-wise, the 7.5 yards allowed per dropback defensively is the same as the number 1 offense in the category, despite having faced the likes of Big Ben, Baker Mayfield really hobbled, and Andy Dalton most recently. That is definitely rough. They're also in the bottom 3 in percentage of drives ending in scores against them, pressure rate, and red zone percentage, allowing touchdowns on exactly 3/4 of those. The only thing that they have really going for themselves on that side of the ball is that they can stop the run fairly effectively, which we just saw now against the Bears. Not having the explosive element that Dalvin Cook brings to the table certainly makes a difference here, especially with what he could bring matched up against linebackers, but the Lions will have to make a choice here. Do they dare to play single high and give Jefferson and Thielen those one-on-one matchups on the outside against the struggling secondary, or do they go more 2 high shells and let Alexander Madison hammer away at them, which is what I hope for, since I just picked him up for a fantasy team and will have him on a good share of DFS lineups, which I advise you to do as well, as long as he's not too expensive. In the end, I just don't see how Detroit can really slow on the visitors here, and Minnesota's defense can rally up and tackle against all those underneath throws, do great stops, and get this game to where it is put in Jared Goff's hands, which is not a recipe for success. I think this is a spot where the Vikings can take advantage of. I got them taking this one convincing fashion, winning 28-17. Laying a touchdown against a team that has been really good at covering the spread is not what I want to do in terms of betting, but I think that the Vikings are certainly the better team here, and I think it'll show. Brings us to the 5-7 Eagles at the 3-8 New York Jets. Philadelphia by 6.5, whole set at 45 points. Other than New England, you could have argued Philly was the hottest team in the NFL heading into this past weekend, winning 3 of the past 4, and all in convincing fashion. And they had a chance to really make things interesting here by moving to 500, especially with the Cowboys' struggles recently. Then they score 7 points against the Giants and lose that game. The Jets, on the other hand, were slightly ahead of the winless Lions in terms of power rankings, I would say, getting beaten down by a combined 50 points over the last 3 matchups, and that actually sounds closer than the games were. Yet, after going down 14-3, the defense was able to shut down the Texans over the final 40 minutes, and the offense was able to move the ball enough to grab that W. Once again, Philly really looked like a dangerous team coming into this past Sunday, having won 3 of the last 4 by double digits, and the only loss coming to the Chargers on the last-second field goal. But then losing to the Giants, thanks to one of the worst games that Jalen Hurts has ever played, with 3 really bad picks, definitely takes some steam off that. They still had over 200 yards rushing, thanks to Hurts himself and a couple of explosives, but you could see to some degree what happens when a team that can match the size up front and put them in obvious passing situations. The stats can be skewed positively a little by the quarterback, but they've averaged 215 yards rushing over the last 5 games, and now the only team with more explosive runs than the Colts at 14. And if not for the quarterback hurting them with some turnovers, it would have been enough on Sunday. They're on number 5 on 3rd downs, thanks to staying ahead of the chains and Hurts making things happen with his legs when needed. Defensively, they're just very basic, with a bunch of cover 4 and the second lowest blitz percentage, just daring quarterbacks to take the easy stuff, which is why they have the highest completion percentage against them, but don't tackle particularly well. They've allowed the third fewest explosive plays through the air, and only 5 teams allow less than the 4 yards per carry. But other than that, they're fairly average and allow offenses to get comfortable against them. Shifting the focus to the Jets, rookie quarterback Zach Wilson didn't really learn anything his time off, it seems like, after seeing Mike White, Josh Johnson, and Joe Flacco dump it off underneath and at least have some success with it. Although getting pressured on a league high 32% of his dropbacks certainly doesn't help that matter. He's incredibly talented, and as long as the Jets put the right pieces around him, I believe him in as a player. But that interception off the backside of his running back on a 3rd and forever is as close to the butt fumble as I've seen probably. They've turned the ball over a league high 24 times, and they don't even score on 10% more of their drives than they actually give it to their opponents. Probably just had the best showing of the season against Houston, because they've been dreadful up to that point, as they're number 32 in points allowed, yards per attempt, and DVOA by a pretty wide margin, just not being able to stop anything consistently, and they've yet to crack double digits with turnovers. So there's really not even that much to talk about here. If the Jets were able to stop the run like I expected them to coming into the year, thanks to the guys that they have in the defensive interior, I would feel better about it, but they've only gotten worse and worse, while being wholly vulnerable to some big plays, despite teams being able to turn on cruise mode fairly early against them. So with Zach Wilson's willingness to push the ball on the field against a defense that limits the deep ball as well as they do, and how that shouldn't be a recipe for success, while Philly can cash in on those opportunities, I gotta give them a W here, winning 26-17. And depending on the injury reports, as long as it stays under a touchdown, I might be willing to lay the points with them. Either way, let's move on to the 9-2 Arizona Cardinals at the 4-7 Chicago Bears. The visitors favored by 8, over under set at 45.5. Alright, we got the best team in the NFL record-wise, coming off the bye week against a team that had just lost 5 straight until barely beating the lone winless team in the NFL. Arizona allowed the MVP candidate Kyler Murray to rest up for a full month, and they went 2-1 without him, showing that the core of this team can pick up the slack, while the Bears were without their flashy rookie quarterback Justin Fields on Thanksgiving, and it showed to some degree, as Andy Dalton couldn't deliver any dynamic plays. So health on the center will be a key role here, even if the two teams certainly have played at different levels. Arizona's offense is top 5 in points per game, explosive plays, giveaways, and they're pretty high up there across the board. Kyler Murray is expected to be back, and could be poised to prove to people how freaking good he was before his time off. DeAndre Hopkins and Chase Edmonds should be back as well, and if they can pick up from where they left off, this is a dangerous group. Along with that, Arizona has the number 4 scoring defense at just 18.5 points per week, and they're number 3 in third downs. Their one issue at times has been stopping the power run game, because they aren't very big on the interior, but they've allowed opponents to gain a first down on about 29% of carries, which is the 3rd highest rate in the NFL. I'm a big fan of Vance Joseph, however, and what he has done with that unit. Chicago's thankfully clawed their way out of the pit that they were in for yards per play, percentage of drives ending in scores, and many other categories offensively, but it's still not very good, and as long as they don't have rookie quarterback Justin Fields back on the center, and he can deliver some stuff off script, they're pretty painful to watch, to be honest. I don't understand why we don't see more of Khalil Herbert, but I love seeing Darnell Mooney being allowed to really show off his skill set. The offensive line still has major issues, however, and they have allowed a league-high 37 sacks on the season. The defense is surprisingly just 1 sack away from the league with 32, but that's a bit deceiving because they pressured the quarterback at the 5th lowest rate in the league actually. They failed their last 2 opponents to just 30 combined points, and the secondary is looking a lot better than it did to start the year. But that was against Tyler Huntley and Jared Goff, so let's not go crazy here. The Bears offense had a chance to look halfway decent last week against probably the worst defense in the Lions and an even more limited offense, but things have taken a drastic turn in this matchup, with Kyler and company coming to town. Depending on how much Arizona wants to ease their star signal caller back into the lineup, or how early they might pull him if they are in control of this game, I could see a pretty bad blowout on our hands, given the Cardinals winning 31-15. Not looking to lay as many points with them because of all the uncertainties, but if they are right, they should definitely win this matchup by quite a bit. Which brings us to the big matchup of this noon window, the 6-5 LA Chargers at the 7-4 Cincinnati Bengals. We got 2 of the more impressive young teams for a large stretch of the season, squaring off against each other, even though the Bengals have shined since their bye 2 weeks ago, beating the Raiders and Steelers by a combined 50 points, while the Chargers have now gone loss, win, loss, win, loss, since they took a week off, and they already went into the bye off a destruction of Baltimore. One week we celebrate Justin Herbert in this LA offense, and then they lay an egg at Denver the next. We've seen Cincy come out flat a few times, but they've been up for the task much more recently, and they get to play host in this one. The Chargers offense has been very frustrating to watch at times, to where they just are so predictable of certain formations, and they don't allow Justin Herbert to attack the intermediate areas of the field, where his big arm can really shine as he zips the ball in there. There is no reason they should be that average in explosive plays through the air, and score no more than 20 points in about half of the games. Herbert makes things look easy, whether it's layering corner routes between the corner and safety in cover 2 perfectly, or climbing the pocket and taking off for those big gains when he sees green grass open up in front of him against man coverage, which is why he averaged 9.5 yards per scramble. Austin Eckler is a great weapon, but when he catches the ball 2 yards across the line of scrimmage, with the defense not backing off constantly, you're just expecting too much of him. The LA defense has its strengths and weaknesses based on how they're structured, limiting explosive plays at the 4th most effective rate through the air, with all the deep coverages, and allowing the 3rd fewest yards after the catch. Unfortunately, they don't make a ton of big plays themselves either, and not smart themselves to some degree, I feel like, presenting some looks in the front that they simply can't stop the run with. They're tied for the 2nd most missed tackles on the year, and in part due to that, they're also the 2nd worst 3rd down unit. That also reflects in the numbers against the run, where they allow barely under 30% of handoffs to lead into first downs, which is the worst mark league-wide. Don't look now, but the Bengals have all of a sudden scored over 30 points in 5 of the last 6 games. We knew coming into the year that they had the potential to have a special group of skill position players, and while the big aerial plays have slowed down to some degree, along with star rookies Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow still delivers the 2nd highest rate of his passes on target. The offensive line has allowed a lot of sacks, but not as much pressures, because they get rid of the ball fairly quickly. And we've really seen the run game of Joe Mixon come alive, with 357 combined yards over the last 2 weeks, and they are one of only 4 teams to turn over 70% of their drives in the red zone into touchdowns. Defensively, they've been equally impressive since coming off the bye 2 weeks ago, holding the Raiders and Steelers to 13 and 10 points respectively. The defensive front has been resetting the line of scrimmage pretty much all season long. Logan Wilson in the middle is an underrated all-around player with a knack for the football, and what always stands out for me when watching them is how aware they are of where the sticks are. You see that over and over again against Pittsburgh this past Sunday, shutting down easy yardage and shallow crosses and stuff like that. The Bengals also surrender a league low 33 penalty yards per game as a team. So as I look ahead to this matchup, the 2 things that I'm really curious about is if the Bengals can continue their success on the ground against a team that hasn't been able to really slow it down for their opponents in that area, and how much the Chargers are willing to break tendency, so since he doesn't get them off the field, thanks to playing downhill with their back 7 against the short passing game. If it was just about the quarterback, or like the top 5 players on either team, I go with the Chargers here, but we just saw Denver control the game against them with the rushing attack, while playing top down but aggressively driving on routes before receiver could even move the chains. I think we'll see another big game from Mixon, since he has a good matchup in the slot with Mark Hilton, where if they do want to man up, in order to not let Keenan Allen work himself open on 3rd downs, they can really do that, and Trey Hendrickson could have a field day if he's left one-on-one with Chargers right tackle Don Norton. So give me the Bengals winning this one on a late field goal, 27-24. So pretty much right on those betting numbers, but definitely a game that I'll have my eyes glued on. And that brings us to the final game of this 1 PM window, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 8-3, traveling to Atlanta to take on the 5-6 Falcons. With the win at Indianapolis, the Bucs have all but sealed the NFC South for themselves, but with a bounce-back win for the Falcons, there's another team in that division that pretty much controls their own destiny for a playoff spot. Getting that win on the road was absolutely crucial for the reigning Super Bowl champs, because they had bookmarked their Week 9 bye with losses to the Saints in Washington before taking control against the Giants on Monday night the week prior to the comeback against the hot Colts team. Atlanta, on the other hand, was able to take advantage of the get-right spot themselves after losing to Dallas and New England by a combined 68-3 score, as they were able to fend off the Jaguars. Tampa's now back to being number 1 on offense with 31.5 points per game, and Tom Brady is getting pressured on an NFL low 11.7% of his dropbacks. We saw Leonard Fournette in the run game really kick into gear for the first time in a while, and if they can continue that trend, those deep shots off play action will only become more lethal. Defensively, they're now quietly tied for number 4 in yards per play at 5.2, and they're also 4 for 23 takeaways, while blitzing on a league high 39% of plays. That unit has not looked nearly as dominant as they did in last year's playoffs, but I feel like the game-changing strip sack by Shaq Barrett has given them new life, and with the secondary getting healthier, I could see them getting back into shape throughout December. You add all of those factors in, and Tampa Bay is now back to being the number 1 team in the NFL in overall DVOA, largely because of how far ahead of everybody else they are offensively. Atlanta's offense, on the other hand, just isn't very good. They got a generational talent in tight end Kyle Pitts and the Swiss Army knife in Cordell Patterson, who Arthur Smith has become the first man to ever actually been able to utilize properly. But Matt Ryan has lost some zip, protection has been an issue, and they don't have explosive plays through the air. And if not for a few nice runs by Patterson, they'd be even worse than 30th, with 3.6 yards per carry only, while being at the very bottom of the list in terms of total plays worth 20 plus yards. The defense has actually been a lot better recently, being responsible for just 1 touchdown in each of the last 2 games, yet they're still second to last in points per game, and they're dead last in sacks, but also being second to last in pressure percentage. They got speed on the front 7, and when teams try to go laterally against them, they can present some issues, especially with Grady Jarrett shooting upfield. But other than that, and AJ Terrell having a breakout season as a second-year corner, there's not a ton to really hang your head on here. That matchup between Terrell and Mike Evans will be a fun one to watch, and I think we'll actually see Big Mike less involved between the 20s at least, as more of a Chris Godwin game, and I could also see Scotty Miller be a factor here on a couple of deep shots. I would think see more of Fournette in the run game early on to test that defensive interior, so they can have that way later on, similar to what we saw against Indy. And then when they connect over the top a few times, they can really blow this thing wide open, to where I don't see Atlanta really being able to match the firepower with the current offensive personnel. Lavonte David and Antoine Winfield will split time or even combine to bracket Kyle Pitts, since that's the main weapon for them on offense. And Matt Ryan will have to play out of his skull to get all its ancillary pieces involved. I think it's too much to ask here, but since it's a divisional game, and the Bucs have not nearly been the same on the road, I'll go 29-20 Bucs. So not comfortable with that spread, and with how the Atlanta offense has looked like, I can't really bet the total here either. Which has us moving on to the midday window, starting things off with the Jacksonville Jaguars at 2-9 at the LA Rams at 7-4. Rams were up by 13 points, over under set at 48. The team that allowed the Falcons to get back on track and might fall victim to another squad desperate to end the losing streak is Jacksonville. It's surprisingly already been a month since the upset win over Buffalo, but they deserve some credit for putting themselves in position for a final drive to tie or win the game at the end against the Colts and Falcons respectively, not so much when they lost by 20 to the Niners. The Rams, unfortunately for them, have completely fallen off after looking like arguably the best team in the entire league, losing to the Titans, 49ers and Packers by a combined 41 points, and while they at least kept it within 8 at Green Bay, it never felt like they were actually close to taking over, so they cannot really mess around here. For Jacksonville, obviously the limited number of carries and Trevor Lawrence contributing in that area helps, but only 3 teams have averaged more than the Jags 5 yards per rush attempt, and it's also encouraging for the offensive line that they're just outside the top 5 with holding opponents to just 20 sacks. They've scored on exactly 1/4 of their offensive possessions, however, only, which is just barely better than the Texans. Defensively, the 6 takeaways in 11 games is 3 less than the next closest team, and they have taken the lead now with 90 missed tackles on the year. They can stop the run fairly effectively, but opposing quarterbacks complete over 71% of their passes and average a passer rating in the 100s when facing them, so they've really had some issues on the back end. For the Rams, on the other hand, they are still tied for number 1 in yards per play at 6.2 offensively, but turnovers and not putting together coherent game plans has really hurt them recently. Matt Stafford certainly hasn't been the same over this most recent stretch, thanks in large part probably due to being so banged up reportedly. He's still top 5 in EPA, and his conversion percentage on 3rd and 8 plus of over 48% is astronomically better than number 2. And this offense has really been nothing like the Rams that we've seen so long under Sean McVay, because they are top 5 in explosive plays for the air, but they're the only team along with the Falcons to record just 1 run of 20 yards or more. The regression on defense has been the bigger challenge to overcome, however, where the departures of coordinator Brandon Staley and dual safety John Johnson III certainly have left a mark, but it's the defensive front that's been getting driven backwards a little bit too much for my taste recently, so opposing offenses can get into 3rd and manageable in situations, but also lacking some aggression in the secondary, as we just saw Aaron Rodgers pick them apart with the quick game because of how much cushion his receivers were given. They're still tied for 16 yards per play, but opponents run one of the highest amounts of plays against them per possession. The team ever needed a bounce back spot, and there was another team bound to get blown out, it seems like. This really screams out to me. The health of Matt Stafford will be a huge story to follow as we get deeper into December, but this is one of those games I could see fireworks, Bell running away from the defense a couple of times, plays that went for 5 yards maybe a week ago, breaking for big ones, and the Jags not being able to handle the quickness of this LA defensive line in crucial spots. So I look at this one as a mismatch and got the Rams winning 34-17. Not sure if the spread should be this large for a team that has been struggling so much recently, but I think the Rams take care of business here if you don't want to lay some money with them. Up, we got the 5-6 Washington football team at the 6-5 Las Vegas Raiders. Home team favored by 2.5, total 49.5. Probably the two franchises with the most shit happening off the field constantly for over a decade now, while Washington has been a little more quiet recently, outside of having to call themselves the football team 2 years ago, and the Dan Snyder email controversies going on in the background. The Raiders' issues have certainly been more public, and I don't think it's necessary to go into detail about them here. Instead, I want to focus on how these teams have done on the field, because while Washington looked dead going into the bye 2-6, Taylor Heineke has resurrected them with a huge win over the Bucs, Ron Rivera getting revenge on his former team in Carolina, and now surviving at Seattle in a must-win spot for both teams. The Raiders have done quite the opposite, dropping 3 straight since their 5-2 start, looking lifeless and basic against the Chiefs and Bengals, before Derek Carr put on a show in the prime midday Thanksgiving game at Dallas, which they ultimately won in overtime, and I think this could be a sneaky good game to watch. Taylor Heineke was a fun story early on, but right now it seems like he might get the Washington organization to fall in love with him, no matter if you think it's right or wrong. It's crazy that Seattle actually had a chance to tie the game later Monday night, because the football team physically dominated the day with Antonio Gibson finding some good lanes and running over defenders in his way. That Heineke was on point, and with Curtis Samuel and Logan Thomas now back in the lineup to go along with Scary Terry, they're a pretty complete offense actually. Unfortunately, they are experts at fucking things up in scoring situations, and that is second worst red zone offense in the league at just 47%. As we flip things around, the defense has improved to some degree in recent weeks, holding the Bucs, Panthers and now Seahawks to a combined 55 points. However, they're still the only defense to allow more than half of the third downs converted against them, and they're highly vulnerable over the middle and coverage, because they need rookie linebacker Jamin Davis to fight his way onto the field over those old guys out there who are hurting them right now. Being without their bookends, Chase Young and Montez Sweat will be a challenge as well going forward. For Vegas, only the Cowboys and Rams average more than their 6.1 yards per play, and the 58 completions of 20 plus yards is 10 more than the next closest team. Derek Carr has been a fringe MVP candidate this season, and we've seen him get good production from basically washed up players, some may call them, like Zay Jones, Deshaun Jackson and company. The issues on that side of the ball is that they're bottom 5 in third downs and in the red zone, which are exactly at 50%, while also being pretty one-dimensional throughout the year, and Josh Jacobs never really getting into a groove. Defensively, they've certainly taken a step up from 2020, limiting big plays through the air and creating pressure much more consistently, but they've shown issues stopping the run, and they're back to being 30th in points per game, in large part due to allowing touchdowns on an NFL high 76% of red zone possessions. It's just become too simplistic on that side of the ball for my taste, as one of the only teams to actually run your typical cover 3 for a majority of snaps still, and blitzing on an NFL low 12.4% of plays. And only the team that they just beat on Thanksgiving, which is Dallas, has been flagged for more yards on average this season. This is another game where if we had looked at the schedule about a month ago, nobody would have circled this on the calendars, and we don't know if either team will play a role once we're January, but winning this game would be a huge step in the right direction for them. As much as people want to celebrate Heineke, the quarterback matchup isn't particularly close, but there's plenty of things to like here with Washington. They can probably pound away on a defense that gives up 4.5 yards per carry, the group of pass catchers as healthy as it's been all season, and the biggest weakness for Washington's defense, which is the middle of the field, is not really where Carr and company like to attack, especially with Darren Waller ruled doubtful for this contest. I think this will be a much more high-scoring affair than Monday Night Football, obviously, because Carr isn't injured and won't miss those layups like we saw with Russ, but I also believe Washington is good enough at those 2 tackle spots to slow down Vegas' edge rushers and put together extended drives. If Waller was going to play, I might lean to the home team in this spot, but I like where the WFT is heading right now, so I think they'll take this one 27-23. The 2.5 points I'm not really interested in. If anything, I'm on the money line. Could see this go either way, but I think there's some value here. Which the 2 4:25 kickoffs, starting things off with the Baltimore Ravens at 8-3 at the 5-1 Pittsburgh Steelers. The road team favored by 4.5, total set at 44 points. Anybody who knows the NFL for the last 2+ decades knows that this is one of the most hate-filled rivalries in all of football. No matter where they stand respectively, these matchups always seem to be fun to watch and a team that may be down still puts up a good fight. 2 years ago, the Ravens got the season sweep, and last year the Steelers did, although a decimated Ravens squad still gave them all they could handle, despite having about half the starting lineup out due to COVID in a weird Wednesday night game, if I remember correctly. If there's a team this season that epitomizes, it's not going to be pretty, but we'll get that W. Baltimore has to be the ones that come to mind, because they've beaten their opponents by an average of just over 2 points, but sit atop the AFC now. While Steelers stunned Buffalo in the season opener, then look completely dead, only to fool some people with 4 straight wins over mediocre teams, followed by tying the Lions, somehow finding a way to make it interesting late, but losing to the Chargers, and just now getting smacked in the head over and over again by the little brother who finally grew up in the Bengals. For Baltimore, it'll be interesting to see how Lamar Jackson responds after arguably the worst game of his career, outside of probably the playoff game he had as a rookie. Thankfully, he's a guy who won't let that stuff affect him for too long, and he'll keep making big plays to get his team those wins. The inside portion of the run game has looked better this last couple of weeks, where Devonta Freeman has taken over the lead role, and it's not just Lamar's ability to do damage on the edges. As a passer, he's tied for a second with throwing the ball 0.8 yards beyond the sticks on average, and rookie receiver Rashad Bateman has become his new favorite target outside of Mark Andrews on a bunch of slants and inbreakers. As we flip things around, only the Jets and Chiefs have given up more than the 6 yards per play on defense, thanks to league-high 51 passes of 20-plus yards surrendered, and only those Jets and the Jaguars have recorded less than the 10 takeaways surprisingly. However, in most of the other categories that matter, they're right up there, like being number 1 on third downs and in the red zone especially. You may move the ball on them and hit a few big plays, but they can get stops when needed and have some young guys up front that really develop. Baltimore also leads the league by 1.5 yards, with just over 15 yards per punt return. On the Steelers side, there's a couple of real bad offenses that are already described in the NFC North, but Pittsburgh is right up there with how tough a watch they are. Ben Roethlisberger is the worst starting quarterback in the league according to Pro Football Focus. He's also near the bottom in pretty much all the aggressive metrics, like intended air yards, yards to the sticks, and so on. Paired out with just 3.7 yards per rush offensively, which is the 4th fewest, and you get a unit that is in the bottom 10 in first downs gained, scoring efficiency, and so many other categories. The part of the team that's fallen off in recent weeks has been the defense. They just got run on to the tune of nearly 200 yards by the Bengals, and they've actually allowed less than 96 yards on the ground just once this season, thanks to the fact that they've lost a lot of bodies up front, and the 14 runs of 20-plus yards or more that they've given up, which is 4 more than the next closest team. TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, and Minka Fitzpatrick are all great, and any of them can take over a game, but they're also tied for the 3rd fewest takeaways as a unit now, with only 10, and they just can't do it all. As you can tell from my tone, I just don't have much faith in the Steelers at this point. Baltimore plays everybody close, it seems like, and that's what this rivalry would indicate we'll see again. But as long as they are smart with how they approach this matchup, they shouldn't have the Pittsburgh home crowd be a huge factor once the 4th quarter comes. We saw the Ravens run the ball in them in dominant fashion last year, and while their ground game hasn't been the same with all those injuries in the backfield, the Steelers are wounded right now in the heart of the defense as well. Lamar had issues with turnovers in the one game that he was available for last year against Pittsburgh, so it'll be key to not give their opponents many easy opportunities, since we just saw the Ravens defense make life hard on a limited offense in the Browns, and this division rival won't be able to light up the score with either. So unless defensive coordinator Wink Martindale can get out of his way and allows those wideouts for Pittsburgh to get some separation down the sidelines against man coverage or draw flags, and they don't turn the ball over in their own territory, I think they take care of business here. So I got the Ravens winning 23-16, covering the spread but staying below the total after I advised you with the same one to bet the over when the Steelers played the Bengals last week, and since he took care of most of those. But I think Baltimore may play more ball control here. Which another divisional matchup with the San Francisco 49ers at 6-5, going to Seattle to take on the 3-8 Seahawks. San Francisco favored by 3.5, total set at 45.5. Similar to the AFC North brawl I just described, over the last decade you can argue the next best division rivalry has been between these two NFC West foes. Once again, there's been a lot of close contests recently, and a couple of years ago they gave us 2 thrillers to decide the NFC's top seed, which the Niners carried to an appearance in a big game. But last year, San Francisco's injuries kept them from being more interesting, and now Seattle with 8 losses probably has their eyes set on what they'll do after the season, with the statuses of Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll up in the air to some degree. Since beating these 49ers on October 3rd, Seattle's won just 1 of their next 7 games, while the Niners have now come out on top in the last 3 weeks in a row, outscoring their opponents by, as I mentioned in the intro, 49 points. So these two teams are certainly going in different directions, and I'll be interested to see the investment of the Seahawks heading into a game like this. They might have crept up on some people, but San Francisco all of a sudden now is the number 3 offense in DVOA, rushing for 140 yards in 6 of the last 8 games, and averaging the 3rd most yards per dropback, thanks to the yards after catch opportunities Kyle Shanahan creates off that run game, with Brandon Ayuk becoming a bigger part of the offense on a weekly basis. So they can play a very balanced brand of football, and once again to scoring positions, they're the number 1 red zone offense in the league, cashing in for 6 on 77.5% of those trips. The defensive front turned things around over the last 3 weeks as well for them, holding opponents to just 54 yards on the ground over that stretch, after they had given up over 100 in every single one of the games before that. They're now also just 1 away from the lead league in tackles for loss, and Nick Bosa has quietly turned himself into a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, while having taken the ball away twice in each of the last 3 games that I already referenced, something that they had only done once over the other 8 games played. There's still some questions on the perimeter, but their rookies have been scrappy. For Seattle, the good thing is their 7 turnovers on the season are the fewest in the entire league, but they also run the fewest plays per drive, another worst 3rd down unit at just 32.5%. Only the Bears and Ravens have allowed more sacks, and big reason for that are the quarterbacks who actually extend plays a lot more than Russ at this point of their careers. And speaking of the Hawks quarterback, he certainly doesn't look right, with issues gripping the ball, which is in part why he actually has the lowest percentage of on-target throws in the whole league right now. The Seahawks defense has been average, I would say, but the one thing that they have certainly going for themselves is being tied for 2nd with just 3.9 yards allowed per rush. They're also on the top quarter in 3rd down and red zone defense. However, they lead the league in yards allowed per game, plays per drive, and are one of the worst 3rd down units in the entire league. As great a rivalry in the past, the Seahawks have a lot of issues right now, and with 9 losses on the resume, you have to question the level of motivation coming into the spot, while the Niners are flying high right now and seem locked in for a wildcard berth. I'm not sure if San Francisco can just mash them on the ground, but if they're smart with staying ahead of the script, with some easy first and pass calls, and dressing up the run game with some different looks, even without Deebo Samuel, they should have little issues consistently moving the ball on offense, and until I see the Seahawks actually try to feature DK Metcalf on their end, who would be the big mismatch here for Seattle, I can't assume that he will be a problem. The market is probably giving the 12s and Seattle too much respect here, because these two teams on the field are going in complete opposite directions, and I got the Niners winning this one comfortably, 26-14. It seems counterintuitive in a matchup like this, but having watched these two teams over the last month, it's really not that close. Which brings us to football and another divisional game with the 6-5 Denver Broncos at the 7-4 Kansas City Chiefs. KC favored by 8, over on the set at 47. To be honest, my feeling about this game has really been in flux. When the schedule came out, I thought it could definitely be a fun one because of all the talent on the Broncos roster, which I would argue still, their 2-53 is better than Kansas City's. Then for a while as the Chiefs started the revenge tour, I was worried nobody in the division being able to give them much of a fight. And now I go in here not really knowing what to expect, because I could see Kansas City doing the thing and putting Denver in a contest that they don't feel comfortable playing in, or the Broncos controlling the pace more so and testing the patience of the big rivals. Either way, Vic Fangio's crew has now won 3 of the last 4, including dominant performances against the Cowboys and Chargers. While the Chiefs may have only looked great in one of those last 4 games, but they've won them all. For Denver, there's a pretty clear recipe for success for this team on offense. When they've run the ball for 120 yards this season, they've gone 4-0. In the other games, they are 2-5 only. Sure, cost doesn't equal causation, and they would obviously run the ball more when they're ahead, but they can control the pace of games with the two-headed monster of Melvin Gordon and, more importantly, rookie Javonte Williams, who is the most effective tackle-breaking runner in all of football right now. Teddy Bridgewater needs to be a game manager, and certainly not a tackler, like we discussed a couple of weeks ago. Defensively, Vic Fangio's group is starting to look more and more like the units he had in past days, like at San Francisco and Chicago, where they would get after the quarterback with zone coverage behind it, while forcing quarterbacks to turn it over against them. With 7 total over the last 4 weeks, more than doubling their season output. Only the Bills and Patriots have allowed a lower passer rating to their opponents than the Broncos, and those are also the only groups to have allowed fewer points. One of the big problems has been covering kicks, however, where they allow 8.5 yards more on average than the next closest team, which is pretty substantial. These two teams, by the way, are numbers 1 and 2 in missed tackles, at just 50 and 52 respectively. Kansas City's offense is still second with 22 total giveaways on the season, and far from perfect I would say, outside of one breakout performance on Sunday night against the Raiders. However, Clyde Edwards-Helaire has added a boost to the run game, and Travis Kelce has started to pick apart defenses again to keep drives going. The Chiefs have been number one in third down offense all along, converting 51.5% of their attempts at this point, and they run half a play more than the next closest team in the league. So staying on the field hasn't really been an issue, but rather their commitment to staying patient, and fittingly for Kansas City, matriculating their way down the field. The KC defense is still tied with the Jets for a league-high 6.1 yards per play surrendered, and I don't think they'll be as good as they were against Dallas going forward, but they're aggressive with stopping the run and putting opponents in negative game script. As long as the refs allow it, they'll try to beat up opposing receivers, and Steve Spagnuolo seems to have been locked in on weekly plans on opponents to make them play with one hand behind the backs, while having figured out how to deploy the personnel at his. If this were to turn into an aerial show, it was up to which quarterback can get out there and make it big for late. Pat Mahomes and the Chiefs would obviously take this one and run away, but I just don't see how we get to that point. Denver knows what's good for them, they'll put the game in the hands of their backs instead, and I think Kansas City will have some success running the ball themselves, since Denver has shown some cracks in the arm up front. Success should play a huge role in this one because of how drastic the splits are between third and long versus third and short to medium for both groups. There's of course a lot of familiarity in plan of attack and the Vic Fangio style defenses, which that scheme is really becoming a huge deal around the league and has been what has given Kansas City some trouble this year. But for spots like this, Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy will have a few tricks up their sleeves usually. Ultimately, I believe they will have a good enough feel for what the visitors will throw at them to be a step ahead a few times in this one and just pose more of a threat offensively to stay ahead in the AFC West race. Chiefs 28, Broncos 20, right around those numbers. Not really something that I'd look to bet on, but maybe I'll look at one of those prop bets for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Could see him being a big feature in this game. Finally, the moment we've all been waiting for, the game of the week, the 8-4 New England Patriots at the 7-4 Buffalo Bills. Buffalo favored by 2.5, over under set at 43.5. First big matchup to decide the AFC East, we got the hottest team in the NFL in the Patriots, who have beaten teams during the 6-game winning streak by an average of just under 25 points, heading to Buffalo to meet the team which has won 6 games by more than 20 points themselves this season. It's been more up and down recently for the home team, suffering a head-scratching 9-6 defeat at Jacksonville and getting run all over by Jonathan Taylor and the Colts, but it's all that they are capable of when they got people to turn off their TVs shortly after halftime at New Orleans once again on Thanksgiving. This is obviously a huge clash, because a win here would give New England a 2.5 game lead basically, while getting to host a rematch, while the Bills could move back in the first place for the division, and not allow Belichick and company to move into the bye week with 7 straight W's. Scores on a league high 49.6% of the drives. These guys want to run the ball right down your throat with a bunch of power and ISO schemes, but they can also spread the field and find advantages that they can attack. I've been saying this for a while now, because people act like Mac Jones in this offense is just a dink and dunk fest, which they can move the ball down the field in surgical fashion, but only the Raiders have racked up more than 55 plays of 20 plus yards. Mac is becoming more comfortable with attempting tight window throws, and he's deadly accurate to cash in on them. The defense is back to elite status this season, thanks to some key additions like Matt Judon as a frequent visitor in the backfield, and rookie Christian Barmore in the interior, who creates a lot of disruption right in the middle, even if the stat sheet may not reflect it yet. Without saying, they are tremendously coached on the back end and can run basically any coverage, but we also saw that if there isn't that one big threat that they have to take away, like it was against Tennessee, they can just lock up in man coverage and make every completion a challenge, and of most, they're easily number one in the Hellos for Football Talk statistic, starting drives 7.6 yards further ahead than their opponents on average. These two teams, by the way, are tied for second with 25 takeaways, while also being second and third respectively in overall DVOA. Second in points scored and allowed each. On offense in particular, they're second on third downs, converting exactly half of their attempts, and we saw them show more of what we saw a year ago from Brian Daboll in terms of spacing the field, creating leverage advantages and working away from defenders for the Saints. And despite not being a great rushing team, they've gained over 200 yards more off-play action than the next closest team, while Allen has been a major factor in recent weeks, again with his legs, more often in designed fashion now. Defensively, they are allowing 0.3 yards less per play than any other team in the league, and are at the very top in several other statistical categories across the board, like pass rating allowed, pressure percentage, average rushing yards, and takeaways the second. The one issue they've had on that side of the ball is surrendering a league-high 30 first downs via penalty on the season, and the loss of Pro Bowl cornerback Trey White will be a huge one to overcome because of his smarts in zone coverage and the fact that they can match him up with top receivers when needed in certain situations. This was the hardest one to call. The Bills have 3 extra days of rest and get to stay home here, but they also just lost arguably the best defensive player and face a team that's been playing better than anybody else over the last 1.5 months. As good as their defense has been, we also saw them get steamrolled by Jonathan Taylor a couple of weeks ago, and it's not like they really challenge receivers off the line constantly, but instead there are opportunities to find voids in zone coverage against them if you don't force the issue too much. New England has faced a team with as good a 5 eligible in the passing game in a while, and we've seen Buffalo have a lot of success against man coverage. Not to forget here, Josh Allen being the ultimate equalizer because of the way that he can extend plays and burn defenses if nobody has his eyes on them. So it'll take a good mix of bringing pressure and backing out of them to keep the Bills' signal caller off balance and maybe force a couple of mistakes. However, with this one being in Buffalo and how much I saw these guys dominate New Orleans, a team that may not be nearly as good, but is similarly constructed, I would say, than New England, I'm going to go with the Bills here, taking round 1, and I think they ultimately split the season series. Bills 23, Patriots 20, and this may really come down to which kicker is allowed to take the last second field goal. And that's a wrap. 14 games broken down. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share with a couple of friends as an alternative to your typical pre-game shows or whatever you see on TV with all the same analysis anyway. Let me know what you think of the picks and where you disagree with me, either here in the comments or on any of my social media platforms. Details are down below in the description, as well as on the screen here right now. I don't exactly know what I'll put up next week. Thinking of doing a more extensive piece on the team unit or something like that. Also thinking ahead to the playoffs, maybe doing a bit of preview there. So if there's requests, I will try to take them into account. Either way, I'll have something out for you guys. And of course, there's always a short weekly video breakdown on my different channels, as well as my rework picks on Sunday, betting tips, and so on, which you can always connect with me on. So until then, see you later. Peace!